Hi, welcome to another WP Content Crawler video. We'll take a look at what's new in version 1.15 of the plugin. We will use the prompt chaining technique in the OpenAI GPT shortcode to create an article. Avoid unnecessary OpenAI API costs during tests by using a sample response. Structure product attributes by using OpenAI API to easily retrieve them when it is not possible to use a CSS selector. Calculate the total price of a product by adding the shipping price retrieved from the target site. Translate with a different translation service when one service fails. Disable the crawling conditionally. Remove unnecessary HTML code to reduce the content's character count by 25%. Assign the next page URL by retrieving it from another page. Modify the publish date with newly added date modification commands. Create element attributes. Pause the script execution to comply with the API rate limits, and more. Let's get started. It is now possible to select GPT-4o, GPT-4o Mini, and GPT-4 Turbo models in the chat mode of the OpenAI GPT shortcode. GPT-4o Mini is selected by default now. You can now use model response shortcode in the chat messages of OpenAI GPT shortcode. This shortcode is used to include the model response up until that point. This enables to easily create prompt chains. Let's see an example. Let's ask the model to give us 3 positive numbers. In the next message, let's select assistant as the role and include the model response shortcode. This shortcode will be replaced with the response of the model up until this point. So the chat messages up until this point will be sent to the model, and then its response will be retrieved and put in place of the model response shortcode. Now let's add another user message that asks the model to multiply the second number by 2. Let's test this. When we observe the information messages, we see that the second number is 12.3. So the model multiplies that number by 2 and finds 24.6 as expected. Let's say we want the model to do one more thing about the last result. To do this, let's add another assistant message and include the model response shortcode. Then, finally, let's add a user message and ask the model to multiply the result by 2 as well. This time, the second number is 7. So when it is multiplied by 2 twice, the result is 28, as expected. Now, let's see another example. Large language models are better at simpler tasks. The prompt chaining technique is used to make the model work on subtasks to achieve the main task. By this way, the quality of the response is better, and it is easier to steer the model. For this example, we want the model to write a technology article. However, we want it to write at most 4 sections. To do this, we ask the model to create an outline with only 4 headings. After that, we ask the model to fill the headings with at most 1 paragraph. So overall, we want the model to write a 4-paragraph article with 4 headings. Let's test this. The model did exactly what we asked from it. It created 4 headings and filled them with at most 1 paragraph of text, as expected. Please note that you can also use the other shortcodes in the chat messages to include specific things from the page being crawled. For example, you can give the model the title of the post to instruct it to write a technology article about that title. You can also search for prompt chaining examples online to better grasp the concept. Sometimes we want to create an element whose content is created by OpenAI GPT shortcode. However, when testing the CSS selectors that select that element, we do not want to send an API request to avoid unnecessary costs. In that case, we can use the newly added sample response text area to define a sample response that will be used during the tests, like CSS selector tests. To show an example, let me create an element that uses OpenAI GPT shortcode. When we test this, we see the shortcode itself, not its actual value. This is because we did not configure the create command to use local custom shortcodes. Let's do that and test again. We see our sample response. Great. This test did not cost us anything because the API is never called during the test. The sample response option is automatically assigned as the value of the last test result, so you do not have to fill it manually. When you change the sample response, a new shortcode is created. So let's copy this shortcode and replace the previous one. We see the new response. Great. Now, during the tests performed in the site settings page, this sample response will be used. However, when testing in the tester page or crawling, a new response will be retrieved from the API. It is now possible to select the response format as JSON object in OpenAI GPT shortcode. By default, the response format is text, so the output will be in plain text format. Let's select JSON object. Please note that the prompt must contain JSON in it, even if the response format is selected as JSON object. Let's test this without sending JSON keyword in the prompt. We received an error saying that the message must contain JSON in it. So let's update the message to include JSON. We received a response in valid JSON format. Great. Selecting JSON object as the response format guarantees that the response will be valid JSON data. To see the difference between the response formats, let's change the format to text without changing the prompt that requests valid JSON from the model. The model returned a bunch of text in addition to JSON. So as a whole, this is not valid JSON. Let's select the default option and test again. Because this is the same as selecting text, the returned response is still not in valid JSON. When you want to work with JSON, you should select the JSON object option and instruct the model to return JSON in the prompt. By this way, you are guaranteed to retrieve a JSON. After that, you can use the plugin's JSON parsing features to interact with the model's response. It is now possible to use local custom shortcodes in the create command when creating an element. If you check the use local custom shortcodes checkbox, the shortcodes used in the HTML template of the new element will be applied immediately. Otherwise, they will be applied when they are used in a place where the shortcodes are applied, such as the post content. Immediately applying the shortcodes makes it possible to use the OpenAI GPT shortcode to process information. Let's see an example. Here, we have an eBay page that contains product attributes. Although it is possible to select the brand or other product attributes with CSS selectors in this page, let's assume we cannot do that. To make them easily selectable, we can send the text of the product attributes to OpenAI API and retrieve them in JSON format. In other words, we can use a large language model to structure the data. First, we define a local custom shortcode that contains the text of the product attributes. In the new elements HTML code option, we create a div element with the ID of structured attributes. Inside that element, we can insert an OpenAI GPT shortcode. Let's see the shortcode used in this example. In the prompt, we ask the model to convert the given text into JSON. We give the model the text of the product attributes by using the created local custom shortcode. We also specify the structure of the JSON that the model should output. We also specify the response format as JSON, so that the model outputs valid JSON. To test this shortcode, let's paste the text of the product attributes we copied from the target page. Now, when we test the shortcode, we see the output is in valid JSON and it is structured exactly as specified in the prompt. Now we can copy and use this shortcode in the template. Let's see if this works. Great, we get the JSON data. We can now retrieve specific fields from this JSON via the options box. Let's make the options box treat the value as JSON first. Now in the templates, we can specify the JSON path of the field via the WCC item shortcode. For example, let's get the brand. Awesome. We can also get the department. Now let's see another way of handling the JSON output by the language model. We can convert the JSON into HTML automatically. We simply select text as JSON property of the element subject and then the convert to HTML automatically command, and specify the CSS selector of the element that contains the model's output. We can see the generated HTML here. Just like other elements, we can select them. For example, let's save the brand as a custom post meta. To make sure it works, let's test the settings on a page that contains a product from a different brand. We can see that the brand is found correctly. Sweet! We can also observe the structured data output by the model by observing the explanation of the convert to HTML automatically command. It is now possible to use local custom shortcodes in the calculate command. This makes it possible to use any numeric value of the page in the formula. Let's say we need to retrieve the total price of a product by adding the shipping price to the regular price of the product, which is the case for this eBay product. The shipping price is not included in the price of the product. Okay, our goal is to create an element with an attribute value that has the total price of the product. To do this, let's first create an element with the ID of total price. Now let's assign the total price to the data price attribute of that element. To do this, we need to select that element's numeric attribute value property. When we do that, we can select the calculate command. In this command, we specify the total price element and its data price attribute. Because the element does not currently have the data price attribute, we check the create attribute option. Now we can work on the formula. We need two prices, which are the regular price and shipping price. In the local custom shortcodes option, we define these two prices as custom shortcodes. These shortcodes can be used in the formula. You can also see the buttons of the local custom shortcodes in the shortcodes option. After the shortcodes are defined, we simply add these values together by using the plus operator in the formula. Now that our data price attribute is ready, we can use it in the regular price selectors option, like this. The value is calculated correctly, as expected. If the value of a custom local shortcode is not found, it will be considered as 0. Let's change the CSS selector of the shipping price shortcode so that it cannot find a value. As you can see, the regular price is used as is without any change because the shipping price is considered as 0. Of course, you can use any fixed number in the formula as well. Let's add $2 to the price, for example. It is now possible to interact with the errors that happen during crawling via the filters. In the filters, you can now select all errors, translation errors, spinning errors, OpenAI API errors, and file saving errors as the subject. For example, let's select the translation errors subject. This subject lets us interact with the translation errors only. Let's do something if there is a translation error. To do this, we select exists as the condition command. For the action command, we can disable the scheduling for this site, for example. By this way, if there is a translation error, the site will no longer crawl new posts. Another way of utilizing the error commands is to retry something when there is an error. For example, we can try to translate the post with a translation service, and if that fails, we can try to translate it with another service. To demonstrate how this can work, let me select the translate command. Let's say I want to translate via Amazon Translate API. Now, let's create another filter that checks if there is a translation error. Because this filter will be executed after the first one, if the first filter causes a translation error, that error will be available in the next filter. So we can simply check if there is a translation error. Now this translate command will only be executed if there was a translation error. So with this setup, the plugin will first try to translate the post via Amazon Translate API. And if it causes an error, it will try to translate it via DeepL Translate API. Now let's say we want to try another translation service if this one fails as well. To reliably do this, we first need to remove the existing translation error. errors. We can do this by using the remove command for the translation errors subject. This command will remove all the translation errors. We need to remove the translation errors before trying to translate with DeepL Translate API, so that if the translation with DeepL Translate API causes a translation error, that error will be the only translation error available for the next filter. Now we can simply clone this filter and change the translation service to another one, such as Google Cloud Translation API. With this setup, the plugin will try to translate the post via Amazon, DeepL, and Google in this order, until one of them does not cause any translation errors. To demonstrate this, I configured the commands to translate only the title of the post from English to Turkish, like this. Also, I only configured the API key for Google Cloud Translation API in the general settings. Let's see what happens when we test this. Let's observe the filter explanations. The first filter's translation command caused an error, which was then caught in the second filter. The second filter removed the error and then tried to translate with another service, which caused an error. That error was caught in the third filter. The third filter removed the error and then tried to translate with Google Cloud Translation API. It was successful. The title is now in Turkish instead of English. Now I changed the general settings and configured the API key for the DeepL Translate API. Let's see what happens now. In this case, the second translation service was successful, so the third filter did not try to translate anything. Finally, let's see what happens when the first filter successfully translates. I configured the API settings for Amazon Translate API. Let's test. As expected, because the first translation service successfully translated the title, the other translation services were not tried. When catching the errors with the condition commands, you can also use the count property. For example, when the subject is OpenAI API errors, the count is the number of OpenAI API errors. If you remove the errors in an action command, the count will be 0. It is also possible to use the error text. The error text includes the error message and all the details about the error, including the details of its exception, if available. For example, if you want to do something only when the error text contains authorization, you can do it like this. This setup disables the scheduling and sends an email notification when an OpenAI API error contains authorization. You can also interact with the file saving errors and spinning errors. Additionally, when you select all errors as the subject, you can interact with any type of error. For example, you can stop crawling if all errors subject's value exists. It is now possible to enable and disable crawling events for a site with commands. When you select the subject as setting and property as value in the post data filters setting, you can use set post deleting, set recrawling, and set scheduling commands. These commands are used to change the active for post deleting, active for recrawling, and active for scheduling settings respectively. These commands are useful to detect unexpected things. When they happen, you might not want to continue crawling the site. You might want to disable the scheduling, send yourself a notification email about that, and then come back later to update the site settings to handle that unexpected case. After that, you can enable the scheduling again. For example, you can disable the scheduling if the title does not contain the word test in it, like this. The setting is not updated during tests. Let's test the settings. As expected, the settings is not updated, because this is a test. Okay, let's activate the scheduling for the site and manually crawl a post. This time, since this is not a test, we expect the active for scheduling setting to be disabled. We see an information message that informs us about the setting being disabled. Let's refresh the site settings to check if the setting is really disabled. As expected, the setting has been disabled. Simplify command that is available for the element subject is used to unwrap elements that have only one child element in it. This reduces the clutter and makes the HTML code simpler. Also, because the HTML code will contain fewer characters, if you send the HTML code to a translation service or another API, the usage cost of the API will be less. For example, this post's content has 7,782 characters in it. Let's try to simplify the HTML. Let's test again. The post now has 6,100 characters. This is almost 22% reduction in character count. Now let's see remove data attributes command. This command removes an element's attribute if its name starts with data. It checks all the elements inside the subject element. As it can be seen here, some elements have data test ID attribute here. We expect the remove data attributes command to remove them. The post content's character count is reduced to 5,826, which is about 5% reduction compared to the previous one. In total, the length of the post content is reduced by about 25%. You could also remove data test ID attributes by using the remove element attributes setting. However, you would need to specify the names of all the different data attributes. This command finds all the data attributes and removes them, without requiring you to specify the names of the attributes. Let's see what exactly changed in the post content compared to the original. Here, the div elements that are used as wrappers for an IMG element are removed. The unnecessary wrapper for fig caption is also removed. We can also see data component attributes are removed. Here, there were a lot of wrappers. They are all removed while the texts are kept. Previously, it was not possible to assign the next page URL by retrieving it from the response of the make command. Now it is possible. In the post data filters setting, after making the request, we can select the next page URL subject and use the assign command to achieve this. In the assign command's value selectors option, you can select the elements added to the page via the make command. The assign command is available for other text subjects, such as the post title as well. It is now possible to modify the publish date with 3 newly added commands. Let's take this post as an example. Its publish date is December 30th, 2022 at 11:32. To modify the publish date with the filters, we select the publish date as the subject and value as its property. The available date modification commands are now selectable, which are add minutes, set to fixed date, and set to now. Let's start with the set to now command. This command sets the date's value as the current time. The current time is retrieved from WordPress, so your date settings are used. The date is set to now. Great! You can also use the set to fixed date command. As its name implies, you can specify a fixed date. Let's define a fixed date arbitrarily. Now let's see the add minutes command. With this command you can add or subtract minutes from the subject date. Let's add 10 minutes for example. Let's subtract 10 minutes. We can also specify a comma-separated list of numbers for the command to select one of them randomly. Let's say you want to select a specific element as the value of a post meta key. However, there is no CSS selector that uniquely selects that element. With the create attribute option, it is possible to mark certain elements and make it possible to select them uniquely. Let's take this eBay page as an example. The page contains product attributes. Let's say I want to select the brand's name. First, let's find a CSS selector that selects the names of all the attributes, like this one. Now let's create a condition that checks if the element's text contains the word brand. This is because I currently want to retrieve the brand name. Now if this condition is met, I want to add an attribute to the element. So let's select the template command for the element's attribute value property. We enter the same CSS selector and check only the items matched by conditions, so that the command is executed for the brand element only. As the attribute name, I enter data custom meta. You can enter another one if you like. Now this attribute does not exist in the target element, so we need to check the create attribute option. This option will make sure the attribute always exists. Now we can write anything as the attribute value. For this example, I want to define brand as the value. Let's refresh the page and try to select the brand name with a unique CSS selector that uses our newly created attribute. This CSS selector selected the name. However, we want to get the value. Let's inspect the source code of the page. The brand's value is in the next element, so we can simply use the plus sign to select the next sibling. Now we have the brand's value. Great! Let's also get the model of the product. We can duplicate our filter and make a simple modification so that it now adds an attribute to the model element. Just like that, we can now easily select the model value. Let's say I have a few filters in a site, however, I want to transfer only one of them to another site. I can simply use the export button of the filter to export it. Then I can go to the other site and import that filter only. It is now possible to import the request headers that contains new line characters. You can simply copy all the request headers from the developer tools and import them like this. In a category page, you can now add post URLs conditionally by using newly added add post URLs command. It is now possible to pause the script execution by using wait command. You can specify the pause duration in seconds. It is also possible to enter decimal values to specify milliseconds. As an example, let's make the script wait half a second. The command's execution took about half a second as expected. Now let's try 3 seconds. The command's execution took about 3 seconds this time. The wait command is useful if you interact with an API that is rate limited by how many requests you can send in a certain time frame. For example, you can make a request via the make command. Then you can use the wait command to wait a few seconds to comply with the rate limits. After that, you can send your next request via the make command. You can also use the wait command after using an OpenAI GPT shortcode or a translation command, as they make API requests as well, in case that there is a need. A don't resolve relative URLs option is added to the make command. Previously, the relative URLs in the response retrieved via this command were not resolved. Now they are resolved by default. If you want to keep using the previous behavior, you can check the don't resolve relative URLs option. Let's see an example. Here we create a link via the create command. Then we select this link and make a GET request to the link's URL via the make command. To see the previous behavior, let's select the Don't Resolve Relative URLs option. Because the target page contains images whose URLs are relative, the images are not shown correctly here. Now let's uncheck the option and test again. The images are shown correctly, as expected. To better understand what happened, let's observe the URLs in both cases. In the first case, the src attribute of the img elements contain a relative URL, like this. Because the relative URLs are relative to our site now, they no longer work. However, in the second case, those URLs are converted to absolute URLs, like this, so they always work. The Don't Resolve Relative URLs option is by default unselected, which means that the plugin will try to resolve all the relative URLs in the response. For the post data filters setting, two new events are added, which are after post details are saved and after post is completely saved. The first one is executed just after the post details, such as WooCommerce data is saved, regardless of whether the post is saved as a WooCommerce product or not. The second one is executed after everything about a post is completely saved. To demonstrate this, let's send an email notification after the post is completely saved. When we test the site settings in the tester page, the notification is not sent because the post is not saved. Let's crawl this post manually and see if the notification will be sent. We received a notification after the post is saved as expected. Great! You can see when the events are executed by visiting the Life Cycle of Events page of the documentation as well. These are the most notable changes made in version 1.15 of WP Content Crawler. You can see the changelog in the documentation site to learn about all the changes. I hope you like these new features. Please let me know what you think about them in the comments section. Thanks for watching and see you in another WordPress Content Crawler video.